Oh, hi.
Hello.
So you were able to make it work there. How is still sketchy connection?
Well, the thing is that it will be fine, and then it'll just stop cold occasionally. So if I freeze up or lock up, if you have a little patience, I may well be back.
Yeah, for sure.
We'll see.
Yeah, I'll
It's kind of
if I lose you for a little bit, I'll just expect to like stick around for a little bit and hopefully see you in a few.
entertain the audience. Sing a little song.
Oh, okay. I was singing a song.
Types of songs,
If you disappear, now you're just gonna like intentionally disappear to make me sing. But no,
Lord works in mysterious ways, sir.
It's God. It's God. It's definitely salvation. But no, I'm excited to do this with you. I understand you're not Christian, right? You're either are you atheist, agnostic? What's your stance?
I'm atheist and agnostic. So philosophically, I'm agnostic. I don't claim to know that there's no God. For practical matters, I'm an atheist. I don't worship any gods. I don't go to services, etc. I have argued on the atheist and agnostic side Christianity many times, and I'm kind of a fan of the Bible. I like the Bible, and I respect Christianity, so I'm happy to, I don't know, represent the Bible at least. I'll try to do it from a mostly Christian perspective, but I don't promise to be orthodox to any particular faith, and I have some pretty unusual notions of how to synergize the Bible, but
No, that's
I'll do my
fair.
best.
My issues with religion. Hi, Michael. Michael says it's nothing like watching two atheists debating Christianity.
Yeah, I apologize to anyone out there if I
I'm also agnostic, and then functionally, I guess that makes me an atheist. But it's not because I say there is no God. It's because I say I don't think there is proof one way or the other, which is actually part of the reasons I have this topic here. If it was to be shown to a reasonable degree of certainty that there was a specific deity who was the one who we should put faith in, I would do so. But the standard that I would say would be reasonable degree of certainty. Before I would put faith in something, it should be shown to a certain reasonable level. I do not believe that the Christian God has done so. In fact, I think that the very definitions of the Christian God contradict themselves. The idea of the Christian God is that he is omnipotent, omniscient, infinite, all good, all just, and perfect. This is basically all the positive adjectives you could throw at your deity. But I don't think that there is anything that suggests that it is actually the case. So let me go into a few reasons why this would be.
I would say let's try to tackle kind of one contradiction at a time.
Sure.
Bat it back and forth, and then move to the next one. I think that would be easier for everyone.
Okay, sure. Yeah. So the first one that I would focus on would be the problem of infinite foresight. So an infinite being has infinite knowledge of past, present, and future, which means that the idea of the Christian God is that he knows in advance exactly what will happen even before it happens. Everything that will happen in the future, he already knows it. The contradiction in this is that God also is supposed to be all just and all good. But if he knows everything that is happening before it even happens, this has several problems. The first is that the first would be don't worry, it'll all be one argument. The first would be that he. Oh wait, did you disappear? Oh, you're still here. Okay. The first problem.
I missed the last few seconds there. So.
Okay, cool. I thought I saw you disappear, so I paused for a moment there. So okay.
Oh, great, perfect.
But the problem with being both infinite and claiming to be all just is that God created all of the people who will go to hell. He knew, even before he created them, that they would be going to hell. So he was creating people who will suffer an eternity of torture. And he could have chosen to make them better, but he didn't. He could have chosen to make the standards different so that they wouldn't go to hell, but he didn't. There are a couple other things here too. He also could have not. He could have not made Lucifer. He could have not made Satan, but he did. He also could have not put the apple in the garden, the one that tempted Adam and Eve. Why was that apple even there? There was no reason for a being who knows exactly what's going to happen, and he knows exactly that Eve is going to take this apple, she's going to eat it, and then she's going to give it to Adam, and their sin will cause them to be fallen, and then all of humanity will be fallen for the rest of eternity. Why put the apple there in the first place, though? That's on me. So overall, it's simply the point, which is that an infinite being who also claims to be all just still has the responsibility for these things that he has done, which are clearly not just. Go ahead.
Sure. A lot of what you're going to hear from me is kind of, when people say all good, all just, etc., they are saying that in the context of a human being, their understanding of justice, their understanding of what's good. And when we're talking about the nature of God, we're talking about the sovereign creator of the universe, master of everything, infinite being, etc. And some of the ideas of what we call good or just are going to be a little different from God's perspective than from man's perspective. So God gives to man commandments, and to disobey God's will is sin. Sin and evil aren't necessarily the same thing. Good, if you look at the Hebrew terms in the Old Testament, and we're talking about Old Testament God here, really has to do with a couple different things. In the context of human, it has to do with your social interaction with your other human beings, the way you treat other people, and whether or not you obey God. From God's perspective, good is often referenced, if you read Genesis, about creation. God creates things and he calls it good. It's about making things. When God takes an active hand in the world, constructing it, these are good things. But God does evil as well in the Bible, and he says as much. He says, I'm a jealous God. I'm a wrathful God. He destroys things, and he will do evil unto those who displease him, which in the biblical sense, and if you look at the Hebrew definitions, evil for man usually means disobedience or destruction, and for God it usually means destruction. And the root word has to do with that destruction. So God does evil when he flooded the earth. Does that mean God is evil as opposed to good? Well, it's different. God can be both. He is the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, the creator and the destroyer. So God is all things. And yes, God made Satan, and God made conflict in the world, and God made challenges for mankind to overcome and to face, knowing that some would fall and some would succeed. That doesn't make God evil or not good, because he also created everything in the universe, and that is an act of good. And when he destroys and punishes, those are acts of evil, but not in the same sense as for man. For mankind, evil can mean destruction in a context of the secular world, but in a religious sense, it also means disobedience to God or sin. So for humans, good and evil have a little bit of a different definition than for God, because it's a totally different context. God is the sovereign creator of the universe. So justice is, again, a decision by the sovereign being as to what is right and wrong. The tree in the Garden of Eden that gives the knowledge of good and evil is representative or factual. I'm not really concerned as to whether or not the Garden of Eden story is actually literally true, but we'll say it's meaningfully true. So mankind was created in a state of innocence, had free will, but didn't have moral responsibility because they didn't understand what's good and what's evil. They didn't understand the difference between creation and destruction. They didn't understand obedience or disobedience very well, obviously. Eve took the apple. However, when she eats of the apple, she gains, and Adam gain moral responsibility. The serpent says, for God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be open and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. With the knowledge of good and evil comes moral responsibility. The Bible, we're going to say, presumes free will. Correlating free will with creation is a little difficult, but it is possible. You have to think of metaphysical free will, meaning that our human soul is free of determination. Who we are as a person, the way God created us, does not determine the moral choices that we make. Those are entirely unto our own soul, unto ourselves, physical reality. Doesn't mean we can fly, doesn't mean we can do things that are physically impossible, but in decision making, we are metaphysically free from obligation or control by the physical world. That's the nature of metaphysical free will. So when we eat of the apple of the knowledge of good and evil, we become metaphysically responsible. And that means if we make bad decisions, if we do evil, there are consequences. And the justice of the universe is God's consequence for this. Further says in the same passages in Genesis 3, and the Lord God said, the man has become like one of us, knowing good and evil. He must not be allowed to reach out his hand and take also from the tree of life and eat and live forever. There's if he allows Adam and Eve to stay in the Garden of Eden and both have moral responsibility and have eternal life, then there's essentially no consequence for their evil actions. They're kind of like baby deities of a sort, right? And they could become irresponsible because they don't have to interact with the consequences of their choices of good and evil. So lest that happen, God kicks them out of Eden so they can no longer have the other fruit. So you asked, why did God put the fruit there, knowing that at least it was possible that that they would eat of it?
He knew exactly. It's not possible. He knows exactly.
Well, let me give you this. A common Christian construction is that God transcends time. So God doesn't watch he doesn't sort of sit here and know in the future what's going to happen because he understands the determinism of everything or prediction. He can't predict what a human soul will do. Instead, God is outside of time and can watch all of history unfold as if in an instant. So he is not controlling the course of man, he's observing the course of man. So when he creates the universe, which he also in a sense creates out of time, he is not determining what will happen. He's observing what will happen. And he observes it in the past, present, and future because he transcends our physical reality. So that's the common response to that question. It's a little hard to wrap one's mind around because nothing in our reality transcends time. But you can sort of imagine it from somebody who has watched the movie. We know it's going to happen in the film, but we didn't write a script. Even though God sets up the circumstances, he doesn't make the choices. And here's the important part. God likes drama. Like, he doesn't want it to be easy for mankind. He wants you to use your moral choice to be like him and to choose creation or destruction, to choose obedience or rebellion, because that is the nature of being an independent soul and a divine essence. And we have to live with the consequences of that, but that doesn't mean that God has decided it for us. It's still our choice. Does that make sense?
Sort of, but in order to say that, you're saying that God is limited, that he wasn't smart enough to think, oh, what's going to happen in 10 minutes? Of course he knew what was going to happen in 10 minutes. He knew it.
Well, he didn't want to determine what would happen in 10 minutes.
I'm not arguing determinism, but I am arguing that you hold someone accountable for the things they do. And when you say that he likes drama and that it's different when we watch a movie versus the scriptwriter, God literally wrote this script.
Yeah.
This is like,
but he didn't write your part.
No,
in it.
Well, he knew exactly what it would be, though. So
yeah, because he watched the movie.
He created me. He created the character who would do the actions. So he could have created the characters better one way or the other, but he didn't.
No, you're not determined by your character. You have free will. So even though whatever it is that you think makes up you, ultimately, when you come to a moral choice in the road, your past and your brain chemistry, that sort of thing that we as atheists might say are deterministic. In the Christian view, in the spiritual view, you have a spirit within inside you that can transcend those things and make a choice. And God creates those, but he doesn't determine them. They're entirely free in that sense.
Here's the thing. That is possible. It is possible that God made us that way. Or it's possible that he didn't. There's no reason to say that is shown to any degree of certainty. So
well, but I'm merely trying to explain the contradiction.
It's possible, but
sure.
To say that it is correct would be false because it's perfectly just as reasonable to say, oh, he shouldn't have done it that way in the first place. Both are completely accurate possibilities, and there's no way of showing. And the reason why is actually what you yourself said when you talked about the difference between looking at things as humans versus looking at things as God. Well, God, being an infinite being, is necessarily greater in his knowledge than humans would be. So we can't know this, which is part of the problem. And that's another reason that we have a weird thing here in the first place, which is if God created us, he created us with the ability to come to knowledge through senses and through logic. So why, if God created himself through senses, or he created humans with the ability to know things in this way, why would he not then reveal himself to us immediately and be right in our faces? That would seem like the natural thing to do. Basically what God has done is he said, all right, here's a way that you guys can know things. I want you to use these powers of reason. I want you to use your talents and become strong, but not for me. I'm not going to make it for you, which seems incredibly unjust in the first place.
Is it unjust? I think justice always depends on some kind of standard, right?
Yes.
So a just standard perhaps is equity between people. So should humans have equal rights, or should, if you take something, should you give something of equal value? Justice is usually, it's judged by scales, right? God is not on that scale, right? He's on a different scale. He's the creator of the universe. He's not holding things account. He will judge us based on various criteria that he's set for us. But his standard of justice is very different than ours. There is no equity with God. He is supreme. That is the very definition of God. All supreme, all powerful, unassailable. So you can't really say, well, that was unjust of God necessarily, because justice requires scales to balance, and you can't balance with God. He's supreme. So it's kind of difficult. But why would he create a world where there doesn't seem to be justice for all men? Some people are born in good circumstances, and some people are born in poor circumstances, right? And I think the answer to that, Christians might tell you that it's original sin. And I would say that that's part of it, although I think the concept of original sin is a little confused with the idea of consequences for moral actions. The things that Adam and Eve suffered, after expulsion or being exported from the Garden of Eden, have to do with the consequences of their choices and becoming full moral agents in the world and having to live and die by those moral agencies, and a consequence of having to become mortal because they don't have the tree of life available to them. So God has to give the process of procreation so that humanity can continue, because he wants humanity as a species, as a creature, to remain on the earth. He likes his creation, but they can't have everlasting life, so they have to reproduce. And we've got, human sexuality as a result of that. But, again, it drives into consequences. Why is everybody not the same? Because it kind of doesn't matter. God is interested in your moral choices, your action, given the circumstances that you're in, whether you choose to obey or disobey, whether you choose to accept his covenant or reject his covenant, that kind of thing. So it's about the moral struggle, is the sense of justice. And even if you don't get your rewards here, the idea is that if you're righteous enough, you get your rewards in heaven. That was a little less the case back in the Old Testament, but Jesus represents a new covenant and kind of a new deal for humanity, in which they have greater opportunity to achieve this kind of divine acceptance.
Okay. Well, we're not going to have time to get through much here, because 45 minutes is just not going to be enough.
It's a big topic, right?
Yeah. So,
well, go ahead and give us some more. We can leave it at that. People can kind of make their decision.
The thing that I will follow up, and I think that we have a natural transition into another thing here. I'm actually going to talk about, Michael wrote something down here where he talks about the idea of me playing God, and that the question that we have to do here is ask, would God have done this? That's the only way we can answer these questions, because what we're trying to determine is, was there a God, and was this God the entity who the Christians say he was? The only means we have of knowing that would be putting ourselves in that circumstance, in that situation. And yet we as finite beings will have a different interpretation than he as an infinite being would do. So that causes a little bit of a conundrum, in that we can't actually know perfectly what that infinite being would do. But there
I think
are
that's
a
true.
couple things that we can use as standards simply with what we know as humans. Like, for instance, the idea of perfection. We know that perfection, as a human concept, is the idea that something is already at the peak of its goodness. There cannot be anything that would improve or make it better. So the Christian God is claimed to be perfect. But if this is the case, that leads to two problems. The first would be that this world should not exist. If God is perfect, then nothing can make him better. A perfect being has no needs or wants. So why would that perfect being create something when they don't need it?
Why do we create art when we don't need it? It's just God's will,
No,
something he's interested
that's
in.
human, though. It does make us better because we are bettered by it. But God is already
Sometimes.
perfect. You cannot better something that is already perfect. There is no advantage to it. And the second problem that we have here is that there are flaws in this world. The specific design of this world has multiple things that are false, things that don't make sense. Let's talk about a couple. Well, the main one that I always talk about, and it weirds people out, but I think it really sums this up, is why do women have periods? What sort of idiotic designer said, this is the way we're going to do this? We need to have women know once a month that they are not pregnant. So let's see, what could I do? I could have their hand would randomly wave once a month, or I could have their eye would start blinking once a month, or I could have them shoot blood out of their vaginas. Why? What sort of idiot designer comes up with that idea? That doesn't make any sense. And obviously, we come back to this whole thing. We are humans, and we are trying to apply our own standards to the idea of an infinite being. Maybe there is some infinite answer to the idea of why shooting blood out of a vagina is the right way for women to know they're not pregnant. But that's not the only place. You look all around the world. There's a lot of beauty in this world, granted. But there's also a lot of things that even us humans would know we could have done better. That does not lend itself to the idea of an infinite, all good, all just being who created the universe.
Well, nobody said creation was perfect by human standards. We may find things inconvenient or strange or uncomfortable. But again, I would say that that's all part of God's challenge to mankind to deal with and overcome. Or in some cases, in the case of childbirth, it's part of the consequences of disobeying God and being kicked out of the Garden of Eden. You have to reproduce at that point. So God, gave us a physical mechanism in order to do that. It involves some pain and suffering. And specifically, God says that childbirth will be painful, that this is something you're not going to like very much. But you're going to have to put up with it because otherwise you don't get to have any progeny.
Why is it better? Why would that be part of the perfect being who already has perfect ability to do whatever he wants? Why would that perfect being, why would the concept of doing it in a flawed manner, why would that ever occur to him? Why would you say, okay,
But what do you mean by flawed? It's not flawed if it serves the purpose of giving human beings a struggle between good and evil, giving them consequences for their moral choices, giving them a world which puts upon them pressure in order to either make selfish choices or selfless choices.
Well, why is that necessary?
Why is it necessary? Because when you are a god, that is part of the nature of that system of being. I mean, Eve didn't have periods, presumably, when she was in the Garden of Eden. They didn't have to worry about eating. They didn't have to worry about much of anything. It was a state of relative bliss and perfection, something like you might have in heaven. However, but they broke the rules. They broke the rules. They ate of the knowledge of good and evil. Their eyes were open to the moral realities of the world. And for that, they had to face a series of consequences. And, again, you ask, why would God create a world where that's possible? Because what God likes. A lot of people say, well, I don't like it. It seems wrong. It seems bad. It seems unpleasant. It seems painful to me. But again, my kind of central thesis partly is God values drama. God values struggle. God values strife. He values the difficulty of making moral choices. And so he created a world in which there are pressures and beauties and attractions and temptations and all manner of other things as what you might call a moral playground for humanity to exist in and to grow in and to maybe come to understand the nature of what it means to be God. And as for perfection of God, why did he have to create anything? Perfection, I think, is a kind of a misvalued concept, because anytime you want to talk about perfection, you have to have a standard to measure it against. A perfect square, right, has a definition. This angle, this, that's perfect. God, in a sense of perfection, I think this is just sort of a weak way of saying his supremacy. God is supreme. You can never beat God. You can't defeat him. You can't overthrow him. You can't outthink him. But that doesn't mean he's perfect, because there's nothing to compare him to. He is, again, the Alpha and the Omega. He is everything, all of existence, all of the universe. That's God. You can't compare him to anything else. So you can't measure him short or taller. Everything else is smaller than him, is more limited than him, but there's no standard to which he has to meet. Certainly not our standard of what we think would be.
I'm losing you for a moment here. If you can hear this, I'm just going to point out one more time that it once again just keeps coming back.
Okay, there we go. Go ahead.
Sorry, I lost you for a few moments there, but I was just saying that what I did here, and I only lost a few seconds, but it once again came back to this whole thing that we keep coming back to on everything, which is you're just saying that an infinite being has a different standard than humans would have. But the problem with saying that is that there's nothing we can do. How would we come to this being? We have to know to a reasonable degree of certainty if this being is accurate. And the only means that we have of knowing that is through our abilities of rationality. So to just say, oh,
faith.
Well, he could be infinite. Well, yeah, faith, but that's what I'm saying. The question is, should we have reasonable faith? And I do believe that there would be a legitimate time for reasonable faith. Like, for instance, I think that if we could show the existence to a reasonable degree of certainty, then it would be completely reasonable to put faith in the elements of God that are beyond our comprehension, like the idea of the Trinity or the idea of supernatural mysteries. These make a lot of sense. I've never seen Donald Trump in person, but I have faith that he actually is the president, because there's a lot of evidence that would show me, based on secondhand sources and based on all the information in front of me, that shows me that, yeah, he is the president. The same could be said about God. If it can be shown to a reasonable degree of certainty that he exists, and that not only that a creator exists, but that the specific Christian deity exists, then it would be reasonable to put faith in the elements of him that are beyond comprehension. But before we can have faith, we have to have a rational basis for that faith, just like we have a rational basis for anything else we believe in. And the problem with that I have with your argument so far is that they're all saying, well, we can't know, but it's possible because God would have been infinite, so he could have had this thought. But that's not actually a proof. That's simply just saying, well, it's possible. Yeah, it might be possible. I'm not saying it's not possible. But I'm saying that based on the knowledge that we have, it contradicts the knowledge that we have.
Well, I mean, I didn't come here to prove that God is real. I came here to use the Bible and Christian theology to swat away contradictions, to say that the Christian faith, the Christian construction is not inherently contradictory, that the nature of God is not as divided as some critics would say, as a literary character, as an idea. And a big part of understanding that difference is by not judging God on a human standard, because he's not in the story. And so you have to judge it as he's presented as a character. And that has a whole bunch of implications that people skip over because it's hard for us to grasp, or that we can't easily examine. But that's the nature of the personage of God and the construction of who and what God is. So I can't really answer to your question as to why God doesn't make it easier for us to believe. I don't necessarily believe for the same reasons, but I can look at the Christian religion and say God as a character is oversimplified in many people's critiques. Both and defense, some Christian defenses of God are a little, I don't know, they just see him as a kindly old man or something, but there's a lot more to it than that, right? creator of the universe. It's a hard and impossible thing to wrap one's head around, perhaps. That may be difficult for us, and maybe the reason why faith is required for religion. I tend to think it is. I don't think you can. I think there are rational reasons that can support belief, but I don't think there's a rational proof. I've argued against that many times, but faith is a real thing. And if God is a spiritual being, and if we have dual natures, then that free will, which is independent metaphysically from causality, can make that leap of faith. That's one of its functionalities, is to disregard reason and seek metaphysical and spiritual truth. Hard thing for rationalists like us to maybe wrap our heads around, but that's part of the construction. And I think there's some consistency in that.
Well, I mean, I agree with you that there is a consistency. I think we've both agreed on that throughout anything we've been saying. We both recognize the fact that there is a way that you could say this is a possible interpretation. I think we both recognize this. And I think that that's your point, right? That is your point there?
Yeah, that you can use the Bible and construct a vision of God that makes rational sense within the context of the world of the Bible. You call it apologetic. I mean, apologetics is taking something that exists and explaining how it works, right? How it functions. And so that's what I'm doing. I'm explaining the construct of God as an entity, his rationale, his reasons, as portrayed in the Bible, and trying to make so that it is not contradictory. Because I agree, you look at some of these things and you think, well, he's all good, but babies are starving. How's that good? We think baby starving is terrible. But we as human beings have compassion for our fellow human beings in society. We make social contracts to look out for and protect one another. But that's not the case with God. He doesn't make social contracts. He does make contracts with mankind, but they're of a very different nature. You must obey me because I am the supreme being. Do what I say, and you get these benefits. Disobey me, suffer my wrath. That's the contract God makes with us, and babies can suffer. With Jesus, like I said, there's a difference because God offers this sacrifice of his son, born as a man, to come to the earth and die to seal a new sacrament with mankind that says, look, I'm willing to forgive all the mistakes that you've made as human beings. If you would like to come back into a state of grace, much as if Adam and Eve were in the Garden of Eden, you can do that through acceptance of Jesus Christ's sacrifice. You have to believe in him, you have to profess, and in your heart, give yourself into obedience once again into God, and then at some future specified date, but not unspecified date, you will no longer have to choose between good and evil. You will be in heaven in a perfect state of harmony and synchronicity with God, and these struggles will be over for you. If you do not accept that sacrament, then you must continue struggling in the world of good and evil. Maybe you will suffer punishment if he so deems it necessary. Maybe you'll just continue on in the challenges of life. We don't know. I mean, I don't know that. I would have to say that the Bible does not tell us everything. There's a whole lot it leaves out. Much about the natural world. There's a whole universe out there, trillions of stars. We know nothing about what beings are on them. God has chosen not to share any of that information with us. Some people like to read that in the Bible. I think it's rather foolish to read things that aren't there and to make stuff up because you think it would be interesting, and to say that the Bible is a complete knowledge of all the universe. I don't think that's true. The Bible is there to teach you certain things about God and about your role in your covenant with God and what you can do as a moral agent. And to tell you the New Testament about Jesus and the availability of that sacrament for you. So that's kind of how I see that. A little off topic, but.
Yeah, no, but you know what? The funny thing is I agree with you almost entirely, I think, because I was raised Catholic. I had a lot of years of Catholic school. I went to a really right-wing Catholic school for college and studied under Professor John Kincaid, who's a well-known biblical scholar. I have a lot of friends who have their master's degree in theology, and I hear those interpretations all the time. And I think they make sense. The question that I have always had is, how do we come to a rational basis for putting the faith in the first place? And I think that's ultimately where we come to a stalemate. And the same reason why I come to a stalemate with Christians often in that there is a way that you can say, well, if we interpret it through the lens of this, then these actions would make sense. But there's nothing to suggest that we have to believe that. No. There's nothing that says that that is correct. So it's really when you have a lens of possibility versus a lens of what we know. The lens of what we know would say that this is not correct. But the lens of possibility, which is benefited as well by the Bible itself, which says these are the possibilities we should be listening to and everything, there is a way you could get there.
Sure.
But it's
I'd say
fiction.
I'd say there's three lines of finding religion, of understanding it, that people follow from my observation. One is just testament. So the Bible says this, I believe that came from God, therefore it is true. My parents told me it was true. My family tells it's true. The society says it's true. So that's testament. It's secondhand evidence, maybe thirdhand. The deeper you dig into it, maybe the more you have to question exactly how iterant the Bible is, if it's been touched by human hands. But you can have some faith. The second is spiritual awakening. That's the Protestant tradition a little bit more in America. Where we've had these revivals where people say that if you open your heart and you read the Bible and you immerse yourself in God's word, you'll feel the Holy Spirit come into you, and you will be spiritually testified to the truth, the spiritual truth of God and Jesus. And so that's the second approach. And then the third approach comes a little more from apologetics, but also has its roots in the formation of religions and beliefs all around the world, which is to observe the world and try to make sense of it in some fashion, usually through the lens of human experience, emotion, feeling, and rationality. There are some pretty rational proofs of God. Now, you and I may, pick flaws at them, but that doesn't mean they're nonsensical. So, you've got the first cause ideas. Usually, these kinds of logical proofs for God tend to support deism better than they do Christianity specifically, right? But once you get to deism, then you could say, well, we have this testament of the doings of Jesus Christ and of God through the Hebrews, and I have faith in that, in my lineage going back thousands of years, or the Catholic Church, whatever institution that has been built to uphold those truths. And then finally, I've had these spiritual experiences. For a lot of people, it's all three kind of combined together in different degrees. Although I've encountered people that are pretty much just spiritual awakening, some people that really are just about the teaching tradition, and some people that insist that you have to have a logical, empirical core to your belief, and they usually point to first cause and other biblical things, or irreducible complexity in the natural world, so on and so forth. Right? I may take some flaws with some of these arguments, but they're not unreasonable. And ultimately, I think there always has to be a component of faith, although we, as rational people, have faith in our fellow human being, faith in our senses. There's a lot of things that we do have to have some faith in. It's just a degree of how much it takes, right? And I think for a lot of religious people, they don't feel like it takes a lot to believe in God, but others, maybe more so. Depends.
No, yeah, that's true. There's only one thing in life that we can know for absolute certainty, which is I think, therefore I am. That's the only thing that you can say with absolute certainty is the case. Everything else in the world requires some level of faith. Right? I have a lot of faith that you exist and that we're having this discussion right now, but I can't prove that with 100.0% certainty. But it would do me no good to think about it as unproven. It doesn't help me. I should think about the fact that we actually are having a discussion right now. But I think that what I like to do is talk about the level of probability.
Sure.
If something is shown to a high level of probability, then it would be reasonable to believe it, or at least to put more belief in it than something else. And I think both of us don't see the level of proof in Christianity. I agree with you that there are some good arguments, and I always confuse Terrence because he's always like, he isn't sure if I hate Christianity or if I'm defending Christianity. But same as you, I recognize that there are some legitimate arguments you can make for it. like irreducible complexity, and the idea that there must have been, I think there was like a 1 to 10 to the 10,000th percent chance that the universe was like not designed. Like the only way the universe could exist was if it was designed. These are good arguments that point to some level of a creator. My question is it the Christian creator? And I have no way of knowing that, because every way that my head can go through, every logical proof one way or the other, cannot reach that answer. And I don't think it's possible even to logically prove it, because there are too many contradictions to the human mind. And there may be plausible interpretations to that, which is what you've been talking about. But my overall stance is simply that humans, at least as humans currently exist, maybe in the future will be better, but at least as humans currently exist, we can't know the answers to if these interpretations that Christians have are actually correct.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, the thing is you have to keep asking the question, right? That's why we're here, generally speaking, and why I engage with other Christians a lot of the time. Maybe when I was a kid, I was like, I want to prove that I'm right. Yeah. I get a little older, and I learned that I don't want to convince Christians that they're wrong, particularly, especially if their religion makes them happy. If it satisfies their needs, if it makes them less afraid of death, if it makes them feel better about the loss of loved ones, if it gives them a surety in life, who am I to take that away based on my possible rational reasons that I can't prove beyond a shadow of a doubt? I can give you all kinds of reasons. When I defend my lack of faith, I use what's called an abductive argument about methodologies. I tend to find the methodologies that lead to faith decisions to be have inconsistent results, as where empirical rationalism has very consistent results, and so I trust a more consistent method. That's where I usually come from, but that doesn't mean they're wrong. That's just how I arrive at my decision. So I don't like to get rid of that. I do like to give people my ideas. I like to challenge their faith so that they have a deeper understanding of what they believe, because a lot of the time people make assumptions and presumptions, or they just are less aware of all the wider world that's out there, or even just the wider world of Christianity, the different threads of belief and the different ideas. And so I like to share and bounce around ideas because I'm a truth seeker in general. I just like thinking. So I engage in religious topics for that reason. I generally don't challenge people unless they open the door, because it's kind of a personal thing. I don't want to attack it. Yeah, and I can't speak to people, especially, from spiritual revelation, the Spirit entering people and informing them of the truth. I have my own guesses as to what that means in a purely empiricist viewpoint, but I can't know. I can't get inside their head. So I have to sort of accept what they say. I can ask questions about it, explore what it really means, how they arrive there, but I can't tell them they're wrong, right? So, in a sense, I find that kind of faith and that sort of evidence the hardest to assail, or the hardest to question. The logical proofs, well, there's lots of ways to attack those, and they make for interesting discussions. The proof of testament is another one that there's a faith component to that, again, which makes it a little difficult to assail. But I at least like to explore it. I find the Bible fascinating. The history is fascinating. It's, pretty epic in its scope. Anyway, I'm rambling now, so I'm going to pass it back to you.
Yeah, no, I think that there is an element of faith involved in any belief, and any religion requires some level of faith. Atheism, I would classify as a religion. I think there are a lot of atheists who say there is no God, and that requires a level of faith, because that's proving a negative, which is an element of just belief. And I would argue, and I think you would agree, but I'm not sure, but I would argue that people should base their faith off of a level of rationality. And you talked about this with the multiple different ways that people come to answers. But I think that anyone who just believes something is very open to being taken advantage of, especially if they change their perspectives. For instance, many Christians base their political opinions off of their faith, which they couldn't prove in the first place. What if their faith was wrong? Like, if you had a logical basis for it, it would be fine.
Yeah. I'd say, just because we're closing out here, I want to leave that. I think on the topic that there are not that many contradictions, or there don't have to be contradictions in the Christian belief system. But I do think, as you say, that people should think critically about it. They should examine their own faith and try to come to terms with those challenges and overcome them, which is what I tried to demonstrate here today. Use your mind, question, challenge, but it's certainly okay to try and reaffirm your beliefs.
And I would just say that it is ultimately